Hello, everybody, and to another session with Aucademy. I am Dr. Chloe Farahar, and I'm joined today by Melissa Simmonds. I am a white woman with a shaved head, giant glasses, and I'm sitting in my office, and I'm wearing a black and white dress thing. And like I say, I'm joined today by Melissa Simmonds. If you wouldn't mind describing yourself.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm a black woman with black glasses on. I've got some pink love heart earrings because I love earrings. And I have long locks. Yeah.
Fantastic. And today we are discussing executive functioning differences. And it is kind of amusing why we're discussing executive functioning differences. So Melissa's going to educate myself on how they experience these sorts of things. So before we jump into that, we do our typical questions, which are, who are you and what is or are your dedicated interests? So Melissa?
Right, yeah, so who am I? I'm a black British Yorkshire lass, so I'm born and bred in Sheffield. I am mum to two autistic children, married to an autistic husband, so it's an entire black household. My daughter said we should be called A4. And you want to know what my interests are? I love Marvel, so superheroes, things like that. So I nerd out over Marvel. I nerded out over Game of Thrones. So I like things on the TV that I can fully immerse myself into and engage in. That's my safe space.
And I know I've got Ben, who is a student at the University of Kent, or I think they might have just graduated, but he's actually running our Discord server, which is new, and it's the Infodump vaults, and they're specifically a Marvel. You are welcome to join.
Did you see me light up? I was like,
yes. And I thought this because I noticed on your Twitter as well, you've got on your Twitter handle, I think there's like Marvel. Is it Marvel DC or I can't remember? Like
it's Marvel. It's like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Loki.
That was it. Yeah. Because I do like the Marvel universe, but I don't think I'm as dedicated. But Ben absolutely is, and you would. His room, he's got so many things relating to Marvel. I'm just thinking of his room. So he's got like the shield. He's got Captain America's shield and all the little pop figures and things like this, and very, very knowledgeable. There's a number of others as well. So yeah, that's the Aucademy Infodump vaults on Discord, but you have to access it via a Facebook group unless you message us privately, because the Facebook group, we can check who you are before we allow people onto the Discord server. Because it's 13 years plus, so it's a nice little safe space. So that you will definitely have autistic friends who you can info dump to your heart's content about Marvel with.
Good to know.
And so what is it that you're sort of up to at the moment? So are you still a student? Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm still a student. I was supposed to graduate last August, but, pandemic happened and I've got two kids. So I had to very quickly learn to homeschool and failed at homeschooling. So everything else had to be put on hold. And then I was going to say stupidly, but it's not stupidly. I stupidly then went for a job in September to become the adult autism coordinator for Voluntary Action Sheffield. So that's the position I'm in now. And I really love working for VAS. They're very, very supportive, but it then means like, I had to be fully focused on that. So I was having to kind of work from home plus homeschool and just try and function. So I'm still yet to finish my master's, and I am going to, in the next couple of days, be applying for a further extension. So that's where I am academically. I'm writing a chapter for a book on about autism, and I'm writing about critical race and autism, because that's very, very important to me as a Black woman feeling underrepresented in the autism community. And and then any bit of spare time I have, I am watching Disney Plus and the Marvel stuff. So that's what I'm doing currently.
I need to catch up. Like, we haven't started Loki yet because I know, but because, you know, when you're like, I can only watch this series at the moment. So we haven't started it yet because we started The Big Bang Theory and did the whole, all of the seasons, and that was all we were watching. But now we've literally just finished The Big Bang, so now we can move back over and start to look at Loki. But I think it looks good. Like, I think people have, is that right? Like, it's compared to, so you've had, we did WandaVision, and we've done Falcon and Winter Soldier.
So it's Loki.
And then you've got Loki. What are you thinking? Is Loki better? Is it?
My favourite was Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Okay.
Out of all the characters, my favourite character out of all of those is Loki. I've always loved Loki, and I'm not talking about the comics. I'm talking about just the cinematic universe, so the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU. Out of those characters that we've seen, it would be Loki. But watching the series, I now feel more invested in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, because I've found that absolutely excellent. And I think part of it is, again, because they were brave enough to talk about race. So that really resonated with me. And for me, there was lots of tears when I was watching it, especially the first couple of episodes where they weren't talking about race. But for me as a Black woman, I knew that he didn't become captain because he was Black. He made that decision that I can't deal with all that crap. And just being on Twitter and seeing people angry with him, why didn't he pick up the shield? And I was like, well, it's because he's Black, stupid, obviously. And people couldn't see it, but I could, and the Black community could. We understood why he didn't pick it up. Because
there was the phrase that, and this is kind of also, we're kind of gone off on a tangent already, which is also, again, amusing given the title of today's session, which is Executive Functioning Differences. But this is fine. And for people in the comment section who like to joke that I might have attention differences, I like going off on these tangents. Because, yes, I do. I remember there was didn't he have like a sentence or a phrase, and he would never have been Captain America. He would have been Black Captain America.
Yeah.
And that was always going to be the thing that comes to people's minds first.
Yeah.
I know it was much bigger than that, but I think that was it felt like a key sentence, like a key thing that was wrapped up in all the other issues that he would have had to take on board.
It didn't matter everything he'd done for for his country and for the universe, for the galaxy, defeating Thanos. They would always see him first as a Black man. And he understands, the history of racism, the history of testing on Black people. He knew it wasn't a good or safe position for him to be in. But a lot of the fans couldn't see that. They were just like, oh, you've disrespected Steve's honor, including Bucky. Bucky was very upset because Bucky was saying, well, if he's wrong about you, he's wrong about me, and maybe I don't have any good in me, maybe I can't be redeemed. So Bucky was thinking about himself and not looking at it and thinking, well, this is a Black man. So in episode 5, when he apologizes to him and said, we didn't think about what it would be like for a Black man to pick this up, and I'm sorry, I was like, ugly crying. I was like, like that, because actually, to me, that apology meant a lot, because I really loved the Winter Soldier, but he was absolutely wrong about why you know, constantly questioning, why didn't you pick it up? You should have picked it up. So the whole race thing meant a lot to me. And so I'm now more invested in those two characters because of that show. So that has been my favourite. Loki's good. I don't know for me which is third. I don't know if it's WandaVision or Loki. But to me, Falcon and the Winter Soldier is first. But I'm a massive Hawkeye fan. And there's something about my personality. I really love the underdog. And for me, when it comes to Hawkeye, he doesn't have any powers. I mean, Natasha didn't either, but she was really over-sexualized in the movies, especially the first few. And everybody seemed to hate Hawkeye. Whereas, you know, actually, when I look at it, because I always think really deeply about these kind of things instead of my university work, everybody wanted what Hawkeye had. He worked and he went home to his family, had a wife, he had children, he had a farm in the middle of nowhere, and he was very content with that. And actually, you know, Iron Man wanted his family, Steve was wanting that. I mean, Natasha had nothing and she wanted a family. So everybody was actually aspiring to what Hawkeye had. But the fans seem to hate him the most. So I'm a massive Hawkeye fan, and that's what I'm looking forward to the most.
And I'm thinking there's so many things to pick here apart that it's not even about the topic that we're doing. So what I'm thinking, because you might be interested as well, we've got an especially interesting podcast that David and Tigger are hosting, and it's literally just where an autistic person can info dump. So obviously the main page here, our main platform, is discussing any topic in relation to being autistic and educating on that. But if you want to just info dump about the topic of Marvel, but particularly the things you just touched on, I think that you would enjoy that, because you just get that opportunity to info dump with David and Tigger, and then we do it as a podcast. And you've got the opportunity to come on the info dump and we can keep talking about this, because it's actually really interesting as well. I might make a note, because for people watching, we are going to hopefully have Melissa back on, and Melissa is going to talk more specifically on privilege in the autistic community and a number of things. But I think even bringing in those points about in my head, I'm thinking, okay, who wrote the Falcon and the Winter Soldier episodes? You know, what brought them, or what gave them the knowledge to be able to depict what you've described? Because like you said, you discussed basically the Winter Soldier's, his white privilege. He didn't realize that the implications for a Black Captain America, and made it and centered it on himself. Oh, woe is me, as opposed to, well, what is going on for the Falcon and stuff. So okay, that is far too interesting. So we're gonna put a pin in that, and we're gonna have to bring you back on to do those sorts of topics. Okay, so 14 minutes.
I remember those ones. I will remember to show up for that. I will not miss that. Do you see what I mean?
Well, I'll make a note as well, so I can send you some bits. So like, yeah, doing a Marvel info dump for our podcast, I think would be fantastic. It'd be really interesting. We've had all sorts. They've done Lord of the Rings, and they've only just started them, so they're definitely still looking for people. Okay, so second question: when did you discover you were autistic?
I discovered I was autistic at 35, 36. Well, no, that's when I got my official diagnosis, should I say. My son was diagnosed in 2010 when he was 4 years old. And then my daughter was diagnosed in 2015 when she was 6 years old. And it's because when my son was diagnosed, we started to go to a wonderful charity called ACT, which is Asperger's Children and Carers Together. And I started to go there, and I was the only Black parent there. But, you know, it was a place for the kids to play, and you could take siblings as well, which was lovely. And I only saw it as something that boys had. I didn't understand it very much. Like many people, you Google it and it's doom and gloom. And thankfully, someone in my office was the treasurer at this charity, and I went, and so I met other parents who were really, really wonderful and helpful, and we'd, you know, every Saturday we'd be in the parents' rooms relaxing, and these people had been playing and looking after our kids, and it was just nice to have that space. And I started to meet parents who had autistic daughters. So then I started to realise that actually it can present very differently in girls. And I started to hear about masking, and you know, and then I started to realise a lot of the traits in my daughter. Because when my son was being diagnosed, we were all in the room at the hospital, and my daughter was a toddler, and they very clearly said, "Oh, you don't have to worry about her. She knows exactly what she wants," because she's a very strong-willed, determined little toddler. And so it, you know, and she was polar opposite to my son, her behaviour. And so going to this charity, I started to see the differences in her and realise that actually that's how it can be different in girls. So she received her diagnosis, but through all of this, just seeing some of my son's mannerisms and traits and my daughter's, I started to see it in myself, and my husband started to see it in himself. And I was convinced he was autistic, but he wouldn't go to the doctor. So I said, well, I'll go if you go, because I was convinced he was convinced I was. And so we purely went for like some very selfish reasons, because I wanted to be right, because I'm always right, and I wanted to be right again. And we both went, and he got his appointment through, but I didn't get mine. And what had happened is the papers were stuck together. Mine was stuck to the bottom of his. So the day of his appointment, they phoned my husband and said, "We've accidentally stuck your wife's to it as well. Can she come in today for an appointment?" Which was a blessing, because had I had notice, I would have been prepared. I would have known what to wear. I would have thought about the right things to say. But I had to go in there completely blind. Not blind's the wrong word, but not knowing what to expect. I'd not read anything, and just had to go in there and sit in front of a psychologist and talk. And even me admitting that actually it's really hard to talk to you because I've not prepared what I'm supposed to say. And just having a conversation. And because we both went in at the same time, I think we were supposed to have like a 2-hour appointment, but they normally have a partner come in and they talk to the partner as well. But we were both in different rooms. So we had an hour apart, and then we had an hour where there was 4 of us in the room, my husband and I and the 2 psychologists, just having a conversation. And so at the end of it, they said, we need you to come back just for the further hour, because we'd normally have 2 hours with you, but we do think you're autistic. And then so we both went back on the same day for our second appointments, and they both diagnosed us. And I was in floods of tears. I was really upset by it. My husband was absolutely fine, which made me really angry, because I was like so determined he was and I wasn't. And my husband he simply said, "Well, I know my son will be okay because I've been okay." So he was very accepting. And I remember texting one of my kids' parents' school friends, another parent, and she sent home a bunch of roses with the kids for me, because I was at home in tears. And my kids, because they'd seen I was crying, they thought I was ill, like deadly ill, especially because the parent had sent home a bunch of roses for me. And I explained that I found out I was autistic, and they asked me why was I upset. And I realised that actually if I was going to be upset about being autistic, I was saying that there's something wrong about my kids. And I just simply explained that I was sad about the opportunities I'd missed out on, because I didn't know that I needed that extra help. And so that's when I thought, well, I'm going to have to try and find the positives about being an autistic adult. And that kind of has taken me on this path. So I know that's a long way of explaining, but
it's really interesting and so important. And I think that, I tend to use it almost as like to for neurotypical people to kind of show their biases, which is as they might come into training. I'm thinking when I was offline, obviously everything's online now, but I would ask them as they come in the room, are you autistic, kind of thing, and getting to see their responses to that. So it kind of shows your biases about, well, what narrative do you hold about autistic experience? So that must have been quite difficult for yourself, because you're being shown your own biases, and then even when we don't recognize them until they're shown to us, if you like, those can impact how we behave, how we talk to other autistic people, for instance. So that's why I do it with neurotypical people. I wouldn't do it to autistic people because that's cruel. Trying to show them that sort of negative biases and things. So you feel that you moved. Is that an ongoing process, or do you feel that you've moved away from that negative narrative?
I think I'm I'd say 85% of the time, I'm not in that mode. I think when I'm feeling depressed or down, I do understand people who say they wish they weren't autistic. I do understand that. I just like to help them understand that what they actually mean is, they're struggling with their environment, they're struggling with people's perception of them, or they're struggling at work. And it's not because they're autistic, it's because the way the system's set up, that's what's causing the difficulties. It's not because you're autistic. But I understood that better once I started to learn more about myself. So I got the diagnosis, and then my contract at work ended, I think, a year later. And so I thought, I'm going to go to uni and it's a 3-year course, a 3-year master's in it. And I thought, I'm going to go and do that. But then I got in the room and I was the only Black person, which then that was really frustrating for me, because I wanted someone to look up to. I wanted guidance and a hero, and so there's when you go and you search for fellow Black or brown scholars or papers on it, journals on it in the UK, there's nothing. So you have to look at America, which some of the terminology is very different. But so then it means, oh, right, yet again, I'm in a space where I have to start educating other people. And I knew so little. I had to upskill myself very quickly, to make sure that I could not just parent my children successfully, but advocate for them successfully and help them with their self-awareness. So I had to upskill myself very quickly so that I could be the best I could be for my children, so that when they get to adulthood, they're in a position where they don't have the health issues that I have, because I knew nothing about autism. I like a lot of people, knew Rain Man, and my sister's childminder, when she was very young, had an autistic son, and he was nonverbal, and he had lots of, you'd call them meltdowns now. At the time, it just looked like he was being quite aggressive and lashing out. So that to me, those two individuals, so Dustin Hoffman and this little boy, that's the face of autism that I understood. So even when my son got the diagnosis, it felt like my world just crumbled, because and then you go onto Google and it's very negative, and I just thought, he doesn't have a future.
Where are like you say, where are the role models and the representation for you as an individual?
Yeah.
And for instance, I didn't think I could be autistic because it was all white boys.
Yeah.
Not even men per se, because Rain Man, I've never actually watched Rain Man. I've avoided it. But you don't see that representation. And it was only until I started seeing representation of white autistic women adults that I recognised myself.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so some people might say, so playing devil's advocate here, so some people might say, well, what's wrong with just having white autistic women? I think I'm not misgendering you. I am correct in you are.
Yeah, I identify as a, sorry, I always forget about the pronouns. I identify as a woman, so for me it's she and her.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, if I'm playing devil's advocate, well, what's wrong with watching or having a role model who's an autistic woman? Does it really matter whether she's a black woman? So what would you say to those people?
It's incredibly important to have people who look like you representing the community. And I do always use white woman and white man as example, you know. The white autistic community, the females, there was a lot of unrest, so to speak, when it was just white men talking about autism, because the white women rightly said, you don't represent me, your experiences don't represent mine. You know, had we not kind of realized that there are a lot more autistic women out there, we wouldn't understand masking as much as we do. And so it was important for white women to be able to get up and speak and be representatives. And then I think because in society as a whole, there's a pecking order of importance, and it's white man, white woman, and then everybody else. And so I think whenever you have white man and white woman, then they think, well, it's enough because there's representations from both genders. And then that's
both genders in quotation marks. We're very acknowledging of the diversity of gender as well.
Exactly. So it's like, well, you know, there's a man here and there's a woman here. We're both autistic. We are representative of the community. And in fact, you're not, because my lived experiences may be incredibly different to yours. Yeah, I'm a born and bred Yorkshire lass. But actually, as a black woman, my lived experiences, the outcomes on my health and my life expectancy differs. And it differs for lots of reasons, systemic racism and racial bias and things like that being a big reason. And so you need people who look like me also being representatives in the community. And as a mother to autistic kids, I wanted black representation there, because I want my kids to be able to see people's in positions of power who speak for them. And I got in that room and I started getting into the industry, and I realized, oh, right, this is like any other thing in the UK and in the Western world. It's white man, white woman, and then nothing. So it was really, really disheartening for me to find that, because I was, you know, there's a real belief that it's very harmonious in the autism community, because for lots of people who have always felt like they don't fit in anywhere, they realize they're autistic, come to the autism community, and they feel at home because it's the first time they've ever feel accepted. But that's when you're a white man or a white woman. If you're anything else, so if you're like trans, what does that mean? You know, we need trans representation. You know, there are, you know, what if you're gay? You know, what does it mean to be autistic and gay? I don't know. I want to learn that. How do I learn that? Well, I need representation. I need people who have that lived experiences, being able to get up and speak. And unfortunately, like in any other aspect of the UK, it's not there. So for me, having black and brown representation in particular is really, really important to me.
And obviously we've discussed before actually starting the session, that's important to me as well. Obviously not for the same reasons in any capacity. I can't pretend to know. But you're quite right. For instance, I don't know what it means to be autistic and trans, and actually that's really important too. And I don't know what it means to be autistic and say have a physical disability, and so on and so on, right? So, and I always say, I kind of joke, but it kind of not at the same time, that also what I kind of use Aucademy for in a selfish way is to bring on those different lived experiences so that I can actually learn, because I learned very early on in Aucademy, I really don't know everything, and I know I don't know everything, and I can't possibly know everything. So when we had people asking, well, what about, I always bring this one up as an example, but what about autistic people and addiction? I was like, I'm really sorry, I could go and look at the literature, but I don't know how to talk about that. I've not experienced that. So I went off and I found David Gray Hammond to come and educate from that perspective. So that's kind of my selfish thing of like, I just want to learn all the things. So yeah, bringing on that different representation is really important, because exactly that, and like I said, we discussed before coming on, I just don't want any autistic person to feel isolated and alone. And for them not to feel isolated and alone, we need that community or little pockets of community, because you're quite right, our community it's not this homogenous, all singing, all dancing, all shiny community at all. There's some fracture in terms of the different narratives that different autistic people might be embedded in, all that kind of thing. But having little pockets of community with that intersectionality is so important, so that people aren't alone. Yeah, I've gone off on a tangent in my head, but that's why, I mean, we can discuss this afterwards as well, because at the moment, I'll flag it on the screen here, you know, we keep creating different smaller groups that are closed on Aucademy. So they're not public groups, they're for, you know, private autistic spaces, and we have different ones for different reasons. So there's an artist group, because we actually realize there's a lot of autistic artists who've been absolutely soul destroyed by the neurotypical art industry. That might not sound like, you know, well, it's art, is it really? But actually it's been so important for those people's well-being and things, when they've been destroyed in terms of trying to get into neurotypical art spaces. But we also have a LGBTQIA group that's relatively new. We have an autistic caregiver. So if you're a parent or caregiver of any description, but you're autistic, there's a space for you as well. We've got the Infodump one, which I'm sure we might see you on now, talking about Marvel. But absolutely having another group that might be a Black autistics group, a person of colour's autistic group as well, would be really important to, because it would be private and help those people potentially feel safe to have those discussions about what it means to be autistic and LGBTQIA, being autistic and Black and things. So just flagging that for people, in case they weren't aware, we have those groups.
I will say, after Black Lives Matter and what happened to George Floyd, a lot of Black autistic people, for their own safety, for their own emotional and mental safety, took themselves off of social media and took themselves out of the autistic groups, because autistic white people, like any other white person, a lot of them did not understand why we say Black Lives Matter and wanted to say, well, all lives matter. And we were like, well, you know, it's really hurtful when you say things like that. And there was this feeling of, well, we're oppressed as well, so we're allowed to say this. And so lots of Black people, myself as well, who was a part of lots of autistic groups, we took ourselves out of it, because we were like, oh my God, we're not even safe here. You know, this isn't even an environment where people can show us compassion and empathy. And so there are groups out there for Black and brown autistic people. Yeah, we removed ourselves, because it was very obvious that it was no longer safe for us. And it was really, really sad. It was really hard for us, because what we'd seen was so graphic and so violent and so painful. And we needed spaces where we could communicate with like-minded people. And then we went there to communicate, and we discovered that were not really accepted or understood here either.
Dismissed, yeah. And that's why I say that. So when I talk about there's a big difference between, for instance, creating an autistic space, whether that's online or offline, and a neurotypical designed and facilitated autism space for autistic people. Those two things are very different. So I imagine, and I would not presume to do it, to create a Black autistic space, but it's run by a white person or a group of white autistics. Again, that's not appropriate either. So like our LGBTQIA group is not run by a straight autistic or straight autistic people in any capacity. So do you see what I mean? So that's something else we can talk about, actually, if that's a possibility of creating those spaces, but they are run by Black autistic people. That's the whole point. It's not even empowering them, it's just letting, or just not even letting, that's not the right word either. I'm not giving anything to anyone. They can do it for themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does.
We've gone off a completely different tangent. I knew this was going to happen, which is
it's what I do. It's
fantastic. I think these are the best conversations though. So, but it perfectly demonstrates executive functioning differences. So basically, why did we decide it was a good idea to talk about executive function differences for this particular session?
Because I don't even know how long ago it was now, whatever date it was where I was supposed to come and give a talk about race and autism, I forgot that I was due to give the talk, and didn't realise until, I don't know if it was the same day or the day after, that I realised I was due to give the talk. And in the last year, that's happened twice. I was supposed to give a talk to a group of I think it was psychologists at the Sheffield Trust, so at the Sheffield hospitals, and got the time completely mixed up, and they were sat waiting, and I didn't appear on Zoom. And so it's happened twice in the last year, and it's so upsetting for me, who tries my hardest to, I want to educate as many people as possible, and I want to appear to be professional and organised, and to kind of have my shit together. I want to appear to be all of those things, but actually I'm not. And that's why I decided that actually the first talk I was going to have with you was to just talk about how my brain works. And because I always say to people, if I could burn calories just by thinking, I would probably, I'd be probably hospitalized and deemed to be anorexic, because my brain is constantly on the go. And I think there's quite a few Black tropes about Black people being really laid back and cool and calm, and actually, no, I'm like that. I'm just scurrying, I'm very much like that elegant looking swan gliding out on the beautiful water, but paddling for dear life under the surface. And so I was so upset with myself for missing the appointment and appearing not to be professional, that I thought actually the first conversation I should have should be about my inability to function in an orderly fashion when life is so overwhelming for me.
And I think I've made a note, so if you hear me typing, it's just me making notes as you're talking, which is this idea that means you're not professional. Right, so you've used that term, which is really interesting, because we do. We think if we forget things, or if we, like you say, struggle in that capacity to turn up for a meeting, that means we're not professional. And I remember having this conversation with somebody. I remember that they were neurotypical, and they were getting annoyed and talking about how they found it really offensive and rude if people were late for things, right? And I said, but it's not about you. That person isn't doing it to be rude, you know. And I explained my difficulties with time. So I am quite poor with time. So people get frustrated because all my clocks are wrong. Louis gets very annoyed because all my clocks are wrong on purpose. They're all an indeterminate amount of time fast to try and get me. And the reason that they're a random number fast is so that I can't work out what the actual time is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like some of them are like 13 minutes too fast or this kind of thing. And it's to try and force me into panicking and go, oh, I'm late. And I'm not, right? So yeah, I was trying to explain to this person, it's not about you. That person is obviously, they might struggle with time, and I'm certainly one of those people. And it kind of made them think about their perspective because they'd made it about them, that it was offensive to them. So I just find this interesting, this use of the word professional, and worrying that by struggling with time or remembering appointments or meetings, that means that you don't seem or come across or aren't professional.
But I mean, I think one of the things you have to remember is I wasn't diagnosed until I was like 36, which means I masked for, you know, well over 30 years. And so I'm like 42 now. So I'm trying to unlearn everything I'd learned. And I understand why I masked. It was to keep me safe. It was to fit in. It was to be able to observe the correct way of doing stuff. But I don't get that rubber stamp diagnosis and then wake up the next day and, I've kind of unburdened myself with all of that neurotypical crap. So it's very much still embedded in me. And so, yeah, you're supposed to show up on time. You're supposed to be organized. You're supposed to have prepped before. You're supposed to know what you're talking about. You're supposed to be professional. And I can't do any of those things consistently. And it's so frustrating. It gets me so angry. And for me, it's like I'm fueled by stress, so I can never do things on time. So if I have a deadline, the probability of me going over that deadline is like 99.99%, you know. And I can't motivate myself until I'm in the like 11th hour, which really isn't healthy for me, because I, like a lot of autistic people, I have chronic fatigue. And it's because I've coped in a neurotypical world with a lot of sensory issues that I shouldn't have put myself in those environments, but didn't know I was autistic. And so now my body doesn't function as it should. And so actually I should, in theory, pace. I should do things in an orderly fashion, and that would help my health. But my body and my brain doesn't work like that. So I've heard people talk about their brains being like a filing cabinet. Everything's in there and stored. And I think in pictures, so I always talk in pictures. But my brain's like a bin, and it's an overflowing bin, and it's been overflowing for years. And it doesn't have paper stuffed in it. The paper's like scrunched up and thrown in. And so there's some really important things at the bottom of the bin, and there's some really important things in the middle of the bin and then the top of the bin, but it's not in an orderly fashion. So things are put in the bin and things just pile out, and it's whatever's on the surface and whatever's falling out of the bin, that's the thing that I focus on at that moment in time. And sometimes I can be organized enough to look at my diary, or, I've got lots of different noises in my phone, different phone alarms. So I know, oh, right, that's not just music. That must be an important one for that song to be playing for that alarm. So there's times where I do remember stuff, or I'm prompted to remember stuff. And so it's almost like that scrunched up bit of paper is kind of rising to the surface of the bin for me to focus on. But then there's some times where there's so many things just piled in on that day or that week or that month that I just completely forget something. And I forgot our talk. And I was absolutely mortified because it's the first time I was going to interact with you. So you know nothing about me. So it's not even like, I think sometimes when you have a friendship or a relationship with someone in advance, people then understand, oh, well, it's not like Melissa to miss something. She's not just being ignorant, you know, but you knew nothing about me, just communication via email. And I'm always really crap at getting back to emails and communicating via Twitter. And then I just don't show up. And I just felt, I don't think I slept that night. It's very likely I didn't sleep that night, just thinking, how could you do that? And like this week, for instance, two really important deadlines. I've missed two really important deadlines for application things, that affect benefits and stuff like that. Really, really important applications that I received during COVID, during the second lockdown. And you receive the letters to say, oh, just a reminder that this runs out at such and such a time for your kids. And it's like, all right, yeah, I need to get onto that. And I've missed the deadline. And it's because I'm now working in the autism profession. Everybody comes to you with information. Everybody thinks their thing is the most important thing when you're actually in a paid job. And so something that's important to me has now been pushed to the very bottom of the bin. Bin's constantly overflowing, and I've missed it. And I feel so low this weekend because, first and foremost, I'm a mum and I'm supposed to be ensuring that my kids are all right. And I feel in not doing that, in not sorting out that bin, I've missed those things that may affect my kids. And so it's not, whenever I don't show up or whenever I miss a deadline, I think because I appear to be quite nonchalant, people think it doesn't affect me, but it very much, it does. And when you were talking about addiction, for me, I attend something called Overeaters Anonymous. And it's very much like Alcoholics Anonymous or not Narcotics Anonymous, but it's for people with addiction with food. And so when life becomes too overwhelming for me and I can't cope, I will consume large volumes of food. And that's how I numb myself out from everything that's going on. And so for me, especially during lockdown, thank God Disney Plus arrived with all the Marvel stuff on, where actually instead of me numbing out with food, I could at least escape into the Marvel universe, which is much healthier than me eating volumes of unhealthy food. So, yeah.
I mean, there's a number of things there in what you've said. I think the biggest thing I can hear, I guess, is a lot of blame and a lot of kind of beating yourself up for your neurology, which I find that so difficult, because I think so in the sense of difficult to hear, because so when you did miss the session, I guess for me, I just go to, well, I'm working with autistic people and people with attention differences, and my go-to isn't to go, oh, that person's so unprofessional, or that person's what other words were you using? Whatever it might, nonchalant, not, obviously didn't care about my session or something like that. I go to, well, I'm working with autistic people, and yeah, so for me, I don't put blame there. I just so I guess, does that fall back into the issues of masking for so long?
I think it does.
That you're blaming yourself as opposed to, I always talk about reasonable responsibility. So I don't think it's fair for anybody who has a different neurology to be held wholly responsible for some of our behaviours, right? But there can be reasonable responsibility where you say, I couldn't help that was the way my brain works, and but taking some only more of a reasonable account for things. Like I realize it might have impacted that person. I mean, like say it didn't, I just did an impromptu session with Annette and it was fine. But you
Good to know.
But do you see what I mean? Like taking that reasonable responsibility by saying, I'm not going to blame myself because it wasn't something I could help. But I do take responsibility that it might have impacted that other person, kind of thing. Do you want to touch on that masking and where that blame?
I think it's a mixture of not wanting to appear to, a black trope of not, being late for everything, to black people are never on time. They're really laid back and nonchalant. They can be quite ignorant. They're uneducated. So there's that.
Even more layers than just the neurology.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because there is so much unconscious bias in the white community towards black people, and so as a black individual, I'm very much aware of that. And then also as an autistic person who has masked, I've been programmed to make those negative assumptions on people who don't show up on time, and I think I hold myself to a higher standard, and that's something I've always done, and that will probably be down to the masking and the perfectionism stuff as well. Because although I can't cope with order, I know it's something I understand it would benefit me, and I think if I had a psychologist properly sit down with me and get to know me properly, they'd probably say I've got a spiky profile because there's definitely elements of PDA for me. So there's I can see ADHD, I can see PDA,
so
autism.
when just for people who are watching, so with the the extreme drive for autonomy. So do you necessarily feel a sense of anxiety when demands or expectations are placed on you that you want to avoid them?
Absolutely. It's the worst thing in the world when my husband asks me to do something really simple. And I remember once trying to explain to my mum, because I had a tear in one of my curtains. You couldn't see it from the outside, but you could see it in the house. It was near the bottom of the curtain. And my mum was like, aren't you going to change those curtains, Melissa? I was like, Mum, I walk past them every day and I can see what the problem is. And I absolutely hate that they're torn, but I cannot physically do anything about it. And I could see she was trying to understand, but she couldn't understand that for me, any more demand on me, it's so overwhelming, and it just feels like that overflowing bin will just implode. And if it implodes, then I won't have a clue what I need to do next, because there will be no paper for me to read in that bin.
Is it fair to say, if we use the curtain example, so that obviously feels like a demand, and what's interesting there, it's not even a demand or expectation until your mum said something, but it sounded like it already felt like a demand and expectation.
Absolutely.
From an inanimate object, which is important and interesting, right? Is it also the case, like for me, for instance, so I don't feel that I connect with that drive for autonomy, so I don't feel that's part of my profile, but I certainly have that autistic inertia, difficulty starting and stopping tasks, particularly when it's not just fixing the curtain. You would have to work out the steps and start the steps and carry through the steps to fixing the curtain, which might include, I don't know, sourcing more material or sourcing needle and thread, and then you have to take them down. And is it fair to, is there any of that element to it as well?
Well, I wouldn't fix the curtain. It means I have to go and research to buy new curtains. So then that in itself is a 4-month operation of making sure I find the right curtains, the right length. Is it blackout? What does it look like from the outside? What does it look like from the inside? Is it aesthetically pleasing? Does it go with the furniture? Does it go with the wallpaper? What if I make the wrong decision? What if I buy them and we put them up and I'm really unhappy with it? So there's so much that goes into me, that there's so much thinking every time I walk past that curtain and see there's a tear in it at the very bottom that nobody else can see. I mean, my mum saw it because she's my mum, but people don't see it. So there's so much more in my mind that goes into that torn curtain, and that's what people don't see or understand.
And you've already mentioned that you think in pictures. It does sound like you're similar to me in the sense that you're maybe a hyperfan, have hyperfantasia. So do you constantly think in pictures? Is that your sort of go-to way for your brain?
Yeah.
To work, as it were. Yeah. So that's why I describe, or how I explain why I can't make eye contact. So at the moment, I keep looking up because I'm seeing pictures in my head, and if I'm looking at the screen, it's far too distracting, and it kind of detracts from the pictures. Sometimes I also think in sound quite a lot with those pictures as well. So there's that hyperfantasia. But it means that I do what you've just described, which is exhausting. It's so exhausting. And so I was mentioning before, like when we were sort of prepping for the session, the differences. So what we're basically talking about in terms of executive functioning is the differences between and across autistic people. So I do have that need for structure. So I don't have attention differences, although like I say, a lot of people in the comment section argue that I do. But in the sense of, I am quite organized. I do struggle with time, but that's more of the inertia. That's more of the getting the steps started and getting into them. So sometimes it takes me 2 hours to get out of bed in the morning, but I'm not depressed. It's just, I have this routine, and I have to the steps it takes to actually get out of bed and start doing things are quite huge sometimes. Oh no, attention differences. I've lost my train of thought. Hold on. So need for structure and organization. So I'm very much I've got lists everywhere. I do have lots of alarms on my phones and things like that to manage those kinds of things. But this is, and that, so you spoke about yourself in that you need spontaneity. So I need that structure. You do need that structure, but you struggle because of the demand of that structure. So the spontaneity, whether you like it or not, kind of works for you, or that's how your brain wants to work. And then I was thinking of my Louis, and he doesn't have any of that. He doesn't really think in pictures. So everything's very now. I've lost my train of thought completely. So, so let's come back to the whole point. So yeah, you're very much thinking in pictures. And I don't know where to pick up the thread again. Let me think. So the level of masking, because you talked about that and how that feeds into this as well. Can you explain the masking element and the executive functioning?
For me, and I think it's another reason I can immerse myself so much in Marvel, is masking for me is pretending. It's and I pretended to fit in. I pretended I was okay. I pretended I was coping. And so I think with for me, masking is pretending, but then there's also as a Black individual, it's like a triple consciousness. So I have to mask in the Black community because culturally, autism isn't acceptable in the community, and there is little to no understanding about it on the level that I understand it at. And I don't mean on the educational level. I mean the understanding of autism and what it is, and it not being about vaccinations, all of that. There's no understanding. So I have to mask in front of family and loved ones, not people in my actual household, although I do mask in front of them as well. I'm aware of that. I mask in front of my children and my husband. And I think part of that level of masking is to help my kids feel safe, because the majority of the time I think I'm an emotional wreck who my head is just constantly on the go. But it's my job as a mom to keep them safe and to help them to understand themselves better. And so I will share some of my difficulties to normalize it for them, so that they understand that they don't have to pretend in front of mummy, but I do pretend in front of them. With my wider family, I do have to mask because there's not that understanding of autism. So and in the Black community, you mask. But then in the wider community, I also have to mask to keep myself safe, because if me as a Black woman, or even my son who's getting very tall now, if he was to stim in the way that he stims in public, people may see him as being a menace or a danger, and it can go very wrong very quickly for a Black person acting out in public. So we have to mask to keep ourselves safe. So every area of my life that I'm in, I have to mask. And so I think my level of masking, everybody masks differently. There are things that we have in common. So I can't say I mask more than anybody else, but what my observation, and I learned through observation, and the white autistic people I'm around, the white parents who are autistic, the white children who are autistic, there is more of a freedom in them, in their stimming and being autistic. Me as a Black individual, I don't have that freedom. And so even though I am very vocal about being autistic and about educating the Black community in particular about autism, I still mask in front of them, because I have to present in a way where I appear to be educated and knowledgeable, so that they feel that actually we can trust Melissa, we can, my battery's dying, I forgot to switch it on because I'm not organised. We can trust Melissa, we can open up to her about the struggles we may be having, or the struggles our children may be having. So I do have to appear professional. If I showed up a wreck, there wouldn't be well, she's autistic, so that's how she presents. So I do have to present in a certain way to allow Black and brown autistic people to listen to what I have to say. If I presented, if I came as me, I think they would. I don't think I'd get as far as I've gotten. Yeah.
And that is, and there's a couple of things there as well. That must be exhausting.
Yeah, I'm exhausted all the time.
Yeah, and I'm exhausted all the time, and I don't even have to do that level of masking. You know, again, this going back to privilege, and I'm becoming much more aware of that, of my privilege, right? In the sense of Annette and I, she's a autistic, white, blonde American woman. We stand, we'll stand at conferences, not even necessarily autistic conferences, and stim while we're talking and presenting. I stim in my classes when I teach. As a lecturer, I will stim. I will explain why I'm doing what I'm doing, and things like that. And part of it is also to try and make it normal, like normalize it. But I'm very aware of, like you say, that not everybody is safe or comfortable to do that. And when I say safety, that might not even necessarily be because of like physical harm or anything like that, but just not being taken, like saying, well, what if they don't take me seriously?
Yeah.
Because I'm a Black autistic woman in those, like say, if it's within your own communities and things, and they're not going to take you seriously. Because I've learned, sadly, I can't think who explained it to me, but just by explaining that I'm an autistic person, I am not trusted. I'm not trusted to have a knowledgeable understanding of anything, basically. And that's a really hard thing to learn and acknowledge, because I was very capable to people, like people saw me as capable when they didn't know I was autistic, but it changes their perspective. So I don't even think it's, well, I wouldn't invalidate your experiences anyway, but I think it's very valid to say that it is possible and likely that people will see you in that way. Do you see what I mean? Like that you're autistic, so we can't trust that person to know what they're talking about, to know themselves, to be able to even give us any information and things. So,
but then I do also experience a lot of ableism, and I experience that when I try to interact with autistic organisations for work. A lot of them, because I obviously, in their mind, I don't represent their child, because a lot of charities are run by parents, neurotypical parents who have autistic children, and they, that even though a lot of their children are older than me now, in their minds, I'm too verbal, I'm too articulate, I've been to university, so I can't represent them. And it got to the point where actually I had to get really, really firm. I had to get really firm with one person in particular who was very, very rude to me, and was making me quite ill. And it wasn't the actual organisation I work for, but it was one of the charities who I have to interact with. And just the way they were talking to me and treating me, it was making me quite ill, because like I said, my nonchalant ways, it's surface. And I was having to question myself all the time, because I'm thinking, I'm trying to be professional and appear to be coping, but in me trying to be professional, appearing to cope, this person is implying that I can't represent them because I'm not autistic enough. And then it's like, well, what, how can I be autistic enough? I've masked for 36 years and I'm trying to keep myself safe, and this person isn't trusting me, and it was sending me loopy, and it was making me really, really ill. And nobody should have to divulge stuff about themselves that they don't feel safe doing. I shouldn't have to go into a meeting and talk about the amount of medication I'm on, or that I've been diagnosed with depression, or that I've got chronic fatigue. I shouldn't have to do all of that to prove to somebody I'm autistic enough.
To prove you're autistic enough, in quotation marks.
To be pleasing to them. And so I because of my ability to mask, I then also experience a lot of ableism, which is also really, really tiring and really, really upsetting. And I didn't know that would happen in my professional life. I thought people would be happy to know that actually the person in a position of responsibility is actually from the autism community. So we're not just having neurotypicals coming in here and running the show. We're actually getting autistic people in and doing that as well. And these people appear to be really unhappy. And it was like, I don't know if it was testing, that could be my paranoia that they were trying to test me, but it was really making me ill, because they'd fire questions at me like I was neurotypical, even though these people, these are autistic charities. I'd have a million questions fired at me. I'd be expected to do things in a timely fashion. And then they'd say, well, you're not autistic enough to represent us. And so I for quite a few months, And it's weird because it correlates with children's applications. Because my mind was so busy on that, I couldn't even be plucking anything else from the bin. I was just fighting these mini fires, which turned into infernos very quickly. And so because I was just trying to cope with all of that, everything slipped. And that I'll never forgive them for that. I feel it right here, you know?
Even that doesn't even make sense because, well, one, you weren't autistic enough, again, in quotation marks, but then they wanted somebody who they felt was more autistic, again, in quotation marks, but then still the system and the environment was really ableist. So those autistic people with maybe higher support needs wouldn't be able to manage the role either.
Exactly. They wouldn't have been able to.
No.
They wouldn't.
And I find this quite often, the empathy issue. So we're having a session on, like we're doing a panel discussion on double empathy, and managed to pin down Damien Milton, which is going to be fantastic. Yeah. But the empathy issue, as in neurotypical people not being able to perspective take with us as autistic people, is huge. It's such a barrier for us. And I won't say which groups, but I sit on different panels in relation to trying to improve services for autistic people with other autistic people. I'm not the only autistic person there. But it's still run and led by neurotypical people. And they still, even though the whole purpose of the whole project, 2 projects actually, but the whole projects that are really huge projects are meant to be improving the lives of autistic people, changing the narrative, changing services and so on throughout the UK. In those meetings, they're still not understanding that those meetings are disabling us. So, and I've talked about this before, you know, I got frustrated because I really don't function well in the mornings. Like I said before, it takes me so long to get out of bed and start doing things. I need a big time, a run up before I do meetings. And I'm in a point in my life as well now. I don't really have a lot of money, but I'm putting my health first by saying I really am not going to keep booking appointments before 11 a.m. because I am not doing anyone any favors. I'm not at my best. They're not going to get the best out of me, and I'm putting myself through too much. I'd rather work later in the day and into the evenings and things like that. You know, so I've talked about this. I've talked about really early meetings are really disabling for me, and I'm not the only autistic person who said this. You know, and that also usually means I don't experience situational mutism because that tends to be more of like an anxiety-based mutism. So, but I do experience sort of speech shut down when I'm really tired or burnt out or just not, you know, at my best executive functioning wise. You know, so asking people, can somebody please be my voice today? I will be using the chat box. And then them, because they're neurotypical, not really understanding what that means. In our community, that means reading verbatim and bringing me into the main discussion and not prioritizing people who are using speech. You know, and that wasn't happening and things like this. And it's like those, that it ends up feeling very tokenistic for those charities, for those groups and things that say they're trying to improve the lives of autistic people, and yet that perspective taking is not being had. They're not trying to put themselves in our positions and work out why it's disabling to have a 9:30 a.m. morning appointment, that it's disabling to not bring voices in verbatim and bring them into the bigger discussion. You know, these things that I class as quite basic things.
It's also it's about, my opinion, obviously, but it's about them not being able to infantilize us. And I mean, for me, it took me years to realize that, oh my God, my kids will become adults one day. I swear it just, I mean, I knew they would become adults before I realized they were autistic, but I didn't. After they received their diagnosis, because I'm just in the here and now trying to get their needs met, I wasn't thinking about, oh God, they're going to be autistic adults. And I think a lot of the charities, because they were set up by parents, still infantilize the autistic individuals who they work with. And so instead of them supporting a person to become independent or more independent, and I don't mean that means you going out there and living in your own accommodation. It can be
that means
really
for the
basic.
individual.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think for lots of the charities, I think because they're so emotionally tied up in the work that they're doing, they don't know where they end and where the individual begins. And so even when that person becomes an adult, they still mommy-coddle them. And I say it to everybody, I just want to be a mum.
Yeah.
I don't want to be an activist. I don't want to be an advocate. You know, ideally, I would be a person who could interview like Marvel actors and stuff. That's all I want to do for a living. I don't want to do any of this. This is where I have to be because I want to make things better for my kids. But I battle every day with taking a step back and helping my kids take one step forward. And I think especially with the parents who have parents whose children were diagnosed as children and who are now adults, I think that generation before our generation, I think it's really hard for them to sometimes see their children as adults now. And so they can only really interact with autistic adults who need a lot of support from them. And so when people like you and I stroll up and we can have a full discussion with them and, you know, we have very strong opinions and we have evidence to back up our opinions, I think that can be really intimidating for them. And it shifts the power because, you know, they're saying, well, we work for and represent autistic people. And then you and I go up there and say, actually, yeah, we're autistic and this is what we think. I think that's hard for them. And so when we interact with them in a professional way, or we're there to kind of, we're there as volunteers or to help on a panel or in a steering group, I really think they don't know what to do with us. And then so they go back to, well, you know, they don't really represent the autistic people I work with because they went off to university and they've got their own home and they start ticking these boxes, mental boxes, they start to tick to invalidate who we are and what our experiences are. And they don't realize how unhelpful that is in moving the movement forward. And I often say when I do give talks, and I, you know, before I knew I was autistic, I was a parent of autistic children. So I do understand that feeling as a mom. Nobody knows my kids better than me. I understand that and I accept that for all parents. But what I do say to parents is, you know, yeah, your child might be nonverbal. Your child's behaviours may be different from mine, but I can tell you what sensory overload feels like for me. And perhaps that will help you make a connection to your child and why your child's behaving in the way they do. It might not, but it may. And so I try to teach parents to be willing to just listen to what we have to say instead of immediately shutting off because we're not identical to their child's profile. So I have empathy for parents. I have a lot of empathy for the parents, but equally, I think, you know, we're going to have to force them to take that step back so that we can take that step forward.
And there's a couple of things I was thinking there. I've made a note of them so I don't lose my tangent again. Is that, so for instance, myself, I learned relatively early on that there's some battles that just aren't worth trying to get into, because I learned that some people will, like you said, some people will stick to their perspective of the world, their narrative of the world, whatever that might be, whether it's mental health, because that was my background, mental health and stigma, whether it's about autistic people and so on. And they will stick to their narrative, because even if it's not a particularly good narrative and doesn't even help them, it's one they know. And so people who don't want to give up the medical narrative, even though it's completely deficit and doesn't really help anybody, they don't want to be confronted with another narrative. And that's what you say, that so they'll do that distancing. Well, you're nothing like my child. And I think those people, if they're not prepared to listen, and if there's if there's not a little crack, a little doubt in their narrative, then I will be wasting my energy and my resources with those individuals. So that's why really Aucademy is not about forcing narratives, because I've learned that you can't. If people have that deep-seated bias, it can be really hard to change it. That's not to say to stop trying, but I think my resources, and this is again that's my decision, but my resources are better placed for the people who are ready for that. They've had enough of the other narrative and it's not helping them. They don't know where to go though, right? So like I said, you have that negative narrative. As soon as you go online, it's white boys who are autistic, and it's all negative and all that kind of thing, and that's all you're confronted with. So where else do they go? So that's that was my aim, was let's get the people who are ready, and they, even if they don't know what they want, but they're ready for a new narrative and a new education about what it means to be autistic. Just because it's exhausting. It's like trying to fight with and showing evidence to anti-vaxxers. I just don't bother anymore. There's absolutely no point. You will not get anywhere, and it just sucks your life and resources. Where I'd rather go with people who, even if their narrative is completely, soul destroying, but they're ready to listen to something else. I've got all the time in the world for those people. But that's not to say, like I say, to stop trying, but it's just something I can't do. And then I was thinking as well, while you were talking, again, demonstrating that privilege. So of mine is that you were saying, you shouldn't have to demonstrate how autistic you are to that other person. And that actually that might impact you in the sense that they might not take you seriously if you explain actually how disabled we can be by being autistic. Whereas I use my personal examples and try and demask all the time as almost like I guess an educational or like learning technique, and saying, okay, you see me being, talking quite squeakily and quite a lot and going off on my tangents, but I also have the days where I can't use mouth words. I don't do things usually before 11 a.m. in the morning, whereas I used to mask that. So I remember, although my school of psychology knew I was autistic, I remember explaining that I don't do things before 11 a.m. or whatever it is. And even though my administrative manager was really, really great, she was really very accommodating and understanding without patronizing me, she did say something about, oh, well, you just mean on the weekends, don't you, that you don't get up until so and so. And I masked, and I was, oh yeah. But now, nope, I'm not pretending anymore, but I have that ability to be able to do that where it's not going to threaten my job or my career. I don't know where I've gone with this, by the way.
No, I'm still very much at the beginning of the career.
I say career. I just wing it, just so everybody knows. I just wing it. I don't really have that much structure in my life.
I'm still at the very beginning, and again, the people who I work for are fantastic, and they didn't know a lot about autism, and I came in there and they wanted to learn and they wanted to know how to support me. And at first, I guess I wasn't I wasn't very forthcoming in how they could support me because I wanted to act like I could cope. And as the months went on, I coped less and less, and started to be a little bit more honest about what I couldn't cope with. And they really supported me, and they really want me to win. And they're like my hype men. They really big me up and make me feel good about myself. And it's absolutely wonderful, but it's triggering because I have had some really shit employers and been around some really shit people. And so seeing this group of people now really love and embrace me and try and support me reminds me of all the crap I've been through before. So I go from feeling really happy that I work for this organisation to be feeling really depressed and really sad, because I've got all that baggage and all that pain from previous employers where
why are these people able to give me the right support and environment? I'm really angry now that those other people, employers, could have done the same and they didn't.
Yeah, so I got to like 37 really believing that I was lazy at work, really believing that I couldn't stick to a job, even though actually when I look back, I was a civil servant for a lot of years, but I couldn't stick to anything. I was useless. I have a lot of negative words for myself, and you've seen through this discussion, it's very much deep-seated. And a lot of that a lot of that was born from me interacting with these people that I'd worked for, and me really going home and thinking, you couldn't even get that right, Melissa, and that was really basic. And now being in an organisation where, they don't know a lot about autism, but they really want to help people. And so they kind of look at you as an individual and support you as an individual. And we all have the same kind of, everybody in my team has the same kind of moral compass. That's how we connect. I'm just triggered all the time by them. It's awful that them being nice is hurting me. Them being nice is causing me a lot of pain. So I'm on annual leave now. I've got 2 weeks off, and I'm absolutely exhausted because I'm obviously still masking a lot, not when I'm interacting with them, but when I'm interacting with outside agencies, I mask a lot. And so I've got 2 weeks off. I'm having to kind of talk myself out of getting out of bed because my body's that exhausted. But I really, I look forward to going back to work in 2 weeks' time and being with the team that I work with. And I've never felt that before. And it's lovely, but it's really, it makes me feel really, really sad as well that I got to 37 feeling like an absolute bag of shit work-wise.
Resentful.
Sorry, you can hear giggling in the back. My daughter's watching something with headphones on and giggling.
Oh, can't hear actually.
Cool.
But yeah, I can imagine that. I mean, looking back, I've done similar when realising I was autistic. We go through the, we're going to discuss it more and do some training on it, which is the stages of discovery. And we go through the stages, and some of that is anger. It is looking back at different aspects of our lives, the jobs I've had where the people were awful to me because I was different. And it was really depressing. And I went through big stages of depression and extreme burnout. But looking back and getting angry with people in your head because you're like, I was autistic and you were mean to me and you were cruel or you were ableist. And even though they didn't know you were autistic, it doesn't actually matter because they still treated us differently because we were different. So whether they knew we're autistic or not, they can see those behaviours. They can see those, how we interact in the world is different, and they treat us based on that, which is basically them disliking autistic experience and people, which it makes me angry. It makes me look back and go, which I don't do often now because I'm just I thought
I was over it all. I got my diagnosis. I do. It is kind of like it's almost like the stages of grief, you know, that you go
that's what
through.
We're basing our training
and you're remembering stuff. And actually, I watched a YouTube, it was a TED talk by Steve Silberman about his book, and that made me cry because it helped me to forgive like my mom and my teachers and everything, because they didn't realize I was autistic. Their concept of autism at that stage, I would not have fit in that parameter. So I was able to feel better about a lot of things. But yeah, actually being in a space where my manager and my colleagues like really want me to succeed, and there's no competition, everybody's kind of working in their own different area, but everybody really, they're willing me to succeed at this. If I need support, they're like, tell me if you need any support. We want to support one another. It's such a breath of fresh air that it triggers memories of just how awful it was, like in my last few years of being a civil servant, when they didn't know I was autistic, but they knew I had chronic fatigue and just wouldn't support any of the reasonable adjustments that occupational health was trying to put in place for me. It triggers all of that,
and I think that's the thing, is that those environments, the system is built for a very, very, very narrow particular type of person. Because I think about the work, voluntary work, paid work, projects, whatever it might be, that I do. I very rarely work with neurotypical people at the moment. Occasionally I do, and I really notice the difference in my energy that is being sapped in trying to navigate those spaces. Because, my friend Annette is a very different autistic to me. She's got attention differences, dyslexia, dyspraxia. So she has different experience of the world to me. And she used to just really beat herself up about, again, her executive functioning differences, that she really struggles with time. She misses appointments, she forgets appointments as well. She doesn't have the same sort of level of organisation that I have. But I've tried and hopefully succeeded, even if it's a tiny little bit, to get her to understand, but I can't do these things that you can do. She's very creative, she's an artist, and she brings so many things to the work that we do that I do not have the ability to do. That's really how work and life should work, is you bring different people together for their different skills, and not expecting one person to hold all of those abilities, because that's not realistic. So like I say, I'm the organised one. I will be the one that will check if Annette remembers that we've got something happening, and, doing that kind of thing. But she'll bring her skills and her strengths to the situation, to the project, or whatever it might be. And I think we hear this too much, the amount of fantastic autistic people that have been helping me in the background of Aucademy, that when I approached them, or they approached me, and they were just so self-deprecating, because that's how they've been made to feel, that they aren't capable, they don't have this, that and the other. I don't need to know, apart from the fact that it's all voluntary anyway, I don't need a CV from anybody. I just need to know you're autistic and you're interested in trying to do this role. And then if I can teach you the skills that you don't have at the moment, that's fine. Fantastic Sai, so Northern Autie, who does a load of stuff that I tell him off because he does too much. That was him. He was like, I can't do anything. I can't do this. I can't do that. He's now learnt basic video editing because he was interested, and I showed him, and he started doing basic video editing, running some of the groups, and he just didn't think he could do anything, because that's what life and employment and the system has made him believe. But I just need a willing autistic person who's interested in the role, and that's all I need to know. And we'll work around executive functioning differences, we'll work around different disabilities. You know, one of my friends, Jessica, if she does things, I know I can't get her to do anything before 3 p.m. Just she's still in bed, she's still, you know, she's got all these other things going on for her. So that's fine. We'll work that way. She works more into the evenings. Doesn't impact me. Stuff still gets done. I wanted to pick up on a number of things. So obviously we're talking about executive function issues. We talked about masking and trying to mask those. And like I said, I've heard this lots of self-blame, which I get, loads of us. I mean, Annette, she's 49 and she's known she's autistic for a very long time. But she still blames herself for a lot of things and right. Apologizes all the time. And I'm like, Annette, it's fine. I don't mind, you know, that you forgot or whatever it might be. So there's a lot of that blame. So a lot of us have that as well. So I've made notes about executive function issues. You've talked about masking. And then also that it sounds like you take on a lot. So you get overwhelmed. So your bin gets full, right? Yeah. And something that I always come back to, because it's something really important that an autistic therapist friend that I have taught me, was about boundaries. So I'm wondering how much of this is caught up in your boundaries or your ability to put in boundaries, because a lot of us are really terrible at it because we've had our autonomy taken away quite a lot of the time. Our boundaries are often not respected even when we try to put them in place. So I wonder if some of this, like your bin getting over full, being full, and you getting overwhelmed and things, like, are you a yes person? Are you?
I am a yes person. I now, I sit on my hands in meetings so that I don't volunteer to do things. So I've gotten better at that. I have a lot more boundaries with my relatives. So, I mean, I think I don't know any family that doesn't have some toxic people in it or a level of toxicity. And so people, I just used to allow them, well, they didn't ask permission. They just plug into me and just take my energy. So I think of myself as a big plug, and they just plug into me and take my energy without permission. So, I've got a lot of clear boundaries with those people. I've gotten a lot better as I'm getting older at having boundaries. It could be much better, but I'm proud of how far I've gotten. I think though there's that feeling of responsibility though, as being the only Black autistic person who is getting any opportunities to talk. And so because of that, I do feel that I have to do more. So whereas, if you think about the white community, how many white autistic people have got platforms and who are given opportunities to talk. So everybody can talk about just their area of interest. So for you, it's like mental health. I know that there are some people who kind of talk about, like, for instance, the empathy thing. So everybody can, and it's an area that's personal to them, and they talk about their area. Well, we don't have that in the Black and brown communities because there is nobody. So then the person who gets up to talk, you've got to kind of learn a bit about everything. You've got to be able to cover lots so that if someone comes to you, you don't say to them, well, no, I don't know anything about that. Sorry, I can't speak, because I need to get my face out there. Not because I want to make loads of profit or live in a mansion, but because there's not enough information out there about the Black and brown communities, and it needs to get out there so that we can make it better for those people. So I am much better at boundaries, but the lack of representation means that I find it hard to say no, because then I feel like I'm doing a disservice to the Black community.
A lot of responsibility on your shoulders.
Yeah.
Because if you feel like if you don't do it, well, who will?
Who will? Yeah. And I mean,
and it is hard. And when I say, again, there's no negative connotation on us as autistic people struggling with our boundaries, it's really not our fault. We have not been taught early in life to have our anything respected, like our bodily autonomy, our decisions about things, our understanding about things. So there's no negative connotation placed on us being poor with boundaries. And also the thing of saying yes as well, you know, I sat down the other day and I wrote down all my project commitments and things that I'm committed to at the moment, which includes teaching, it includes a number of other things. And I looked at it and I said, I've got to stop saying yes to things. And it's not, and I'm not saying yes to things because I feel pressured or I'm masking and I just want to be a yes person. I keep saying yes to things because I'm like, it needs to be done. It needs to be discussed. It needs, if I don't do it, who will do it, that kind of thing. And if I don't do it, what if the wrong person ends up doing it and it actually makes things worse? Or it sounds like an amazing project, I really want to be involved with that. So it's that kind of thing as well. So I guess what I'm trying to talk about really at this point in time is how all these things feed into how we might struggle with our executive functioning.
Absolutely.
So that was a roundabout way of trying the houses of trying to say, executive functioning, masking, will get overwhelmed. Then we've got boundaries issues where we want to say yes to things because we want to do the things. It's not even because we're masking and we're just trying to be yes people. You know, it's a difficult one.
Fear for me is a very big thing. I have a lot of fear about the wrong people educating people about autism. I really fear that a lot, because I'm not a person where, well, language is important to me. I'm not very rigid with many things, although I probably am, and I'm masking and not aware of it. But language, that is something that is important to me, and I think you need the right people. Or you need the right people supporting other people to educate others about autism. So even when charities put training packages and things together to educate people, and, you know, I want to have a look at that training, because what language are you using? Are you using the old language that you learned when your child was diagnosed a decade ago? Because it's changed a lot since then. And even though lots of people argue with me that, well, that was the label my child was given. They were told they had Asperger's, and I was like, yeah, I understand that, but when I was younger, it was really acceptable to use the word coloured, and it's not acceptable now. And so just because you were given a diagnosis with that title doesn't mean it's acceptable to use it. And that's kind of, and I think me being a Black person, I can say things like that and people can't argue it because it's a fact that.
And I guess it's a comparison that they can understand.
Exactly. And I think that is one of the good things I am good at, is helping people to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. And that's how empathy was explained to me many years ago. They said empathy is walking a mile in someone else's shoes, but keeping your socks on. And I really love that picture. And I do training as well on Black History Month and anti-racism in school. And, you know, it's about, whenever you're trying to educate somebody, it's about talking to me in a way that they're going to understand. And I think organisations want that tick box. So they want to say, oh yeah, we've learned about autism and we've had autistic people teach us. But actually, you know, not all autistic people are going to know the right terminology to use.
Or the narratives and things, yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to be using the appropriate narrative. And so, yeah, it's really good you finding a local charity. That's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I support that. But, you know, what are those, how do those charities see autism? You know, do they infantilize the people they work with? Do they believe it's vaccinations? You know, what language do they use? That's really important.
Medical? Is it deficit? Is it
yeah.
And,
so I'm always really, really fearful, and that is something that that affects my executive dysfunction. Fear of, oh my God, it's going to go, the wrong hands are going to be in control of this, and actually, I don't want Sheffield's understanding of autism to be the medical model. I really want that narrative to change drastically and quickly.
And that's why, even though I'm still struggling with these different, like, they're like steering groups or expert by experience groups, which I don't like as a phrase. I find it patronizing. But you know, that's why I stay on those panels and things, even though I feel like there's no real momentum, there's no real change happening. Because I think if I step away, what will happen? Will it be that fear? Who will be leading that narrative? Is it actually going to really negatively impact every single autistic experience? So not just the people like myself who are privileged enough that I can use mouth words the majority of the time. You know, what about the non-speaking autistic people? What about the disabled? What about disabled autistic people? What about the learning disabled autistic people? And so on and so on. Like, it is a genuine fear, and I get that. You're probably one of the few people I've spoken to where you've actually articulated that as well, because it's a fear. If I'm not there, what is happening? What is being said? Are they just bringing in a token autistic person who, you know, that we can have different levels of knowledge and understanding as an autistic person? You know, is that autistic person, do they actually understand their autistic self and their autistic experiences in relation to themselves? Do they actually interact with multiple other autistic people in a quality way? And do they know the different narratives? And I don't mean to be, you know, they don't have to have a degree or anything like that, but just the different narratives about what it means to be autistic. Because if they've only ticked, you know, one element of one of those three things, they're just autistic. I say just autistic, but they're autistic, but they don't know any of that other stuff. Well, how much good knowledge are you getting from that person?
And that's why I get really frustrated with autistic celebrities, because they come out as being autistic and then everybody kind of starts to bow to them. And then we see them on the front of the National Autistic Society's magazine. And but then a few months later, they may say something that's a little bit problematic about, like, they'll say, you know, autism's my superpower, or they'll say something like, I'm not disabled, I'm just autistic. And then everybody gets really angry with them. And I'm like, why are we getting angry with them? They're just an autistic person who's a celebrity who's come out as being autistic. They've not really learned anything about autism. They don't have a lot of self-awareness yet. And because we are so caught up with celebrity, we now see them as the face of autism. And so we have us as autistic individuals as well, have a lot of responsibility to ensure that we don't get caught up in that in celebrity, you know, because it just doesn't help, in my opinion, it doesn't help our community. So I want somebody who has self-awareness. That's very important to me. They don't have to have been to university. You know, some people they've volunteered for years, or they've supported their own family for years, and they've been around autistic people and they just know what they know, but they're willing to learn. And that's who I want to be around. I want to be around people who have a willingness to listen to other people and to learn. I get a lot more from them. I used to use, I always get confused about the appropriate way of saying I have autism or I am autistic. Is it disability first language? Or?
Oh, identity first.
That's it, right. So I used to say, you know, my kids have autism because I just did not know any better. But then listening to autistic people, realizing, you know, that actually what I'm saying is it's separate from me, then I understood, well, actually that's not really helpful because, you know, it's very probable that it's an autistic sperm and an egg that got together and created me. So every part of me, every cell is autistic. It's not a separate entity that I carry around like a handbag. It's who I am. And so I try and ensure I'm around people who are who can very gently educate me and who I can very gently educate. You know,
I'm so pleased you use that term as well, because that's literally part of Aucademy's ethos, which is gentle education.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And
because I'm not organised enough to read up on.
No, and that's absolutely fine. I don't expect you to, but I feel, and this is not about tone policing. So there are quite rightly angry autistic people who are frustrated, and they should never be tone policed for how they want to educate other people about autistic experience. I just made a decision that it was for Aucademy about gentle education, so that we can try and scoop those different, whether they're neurotypical or autistic people who are looking for something more than the narrative that they've been embedded in, which is negative, and not wanting to, you know, drive them away by forcing narrative down their throat. So like I say, for me, our ethos is very much a depathologized one, social model of disability, for instance, coming from the neurodiversity narrative, etc., etc. But all we can do is educate. We can't determine what people do with that education. So that's how I want to see it, is that, you know, it's gentle education. For people who are prepared, they've got, even if it's just a little tiny crack in they're doubting the narrative that they've been embedded in, you know, that's enough. Can we get in there and give our education? And then it's down to them to do what they want with it. I can't do more than that. So I'm glad you used that phrase.
Yeah, and I know you were talking about tone police, and like you were saying, you know, some people have the right to be angry, and you know, educate in almost like an angry way, and like demand. And as a Black autistic person, I don't have I can't do that. It would not be acceptable. And so that again is another privilege. I've been in many arguments with autistic people about me tone policing them. And I'm like, I'm not tone policing you. What I'm telling you is, you can't have an argument with me about oppression. You can't say we're being oppressed equally, because you know, my family are from Jamaica because we were slaves taken from Africa. We were oppressed, you know, we have been oppressed. So you can't make that argument with me. And I think some people in the community, they have finally gotten a physical voice where they feel they're in a community and they can speak out, and, you know, they're very militant and very angry. But they still have to understand that there are people who have it worse than them. And there's people who have it worse than me, because I'm articulate, I'm a homeowner, you know, I love it. I live in a lovely leafy area. Sheffield's a lovely place to live. So I'm still in a position of privilege compared to other Black people, and I completely accept that. But it is really hard sometimes when white autistic people start to say, you're tone policing me. Because I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm telling you to shut up because you're being an arsehole. And I think what I would like autistic people to understand is, just because you're autistic doesn't mean you can't be racist. It doesn't mean you can't be sexist. And it certainly doesn't mean you can't be an arsehole. and I don't even know if we're allowed to swear on here.
It's fine. I mean, I'm just personally not a swearer, but it's fine.
But some people are autistic and arseholes, and
I say this I don't use that terminology, but what I usually say as well, because it kind of goes back to what you said before, like some people who have that very frustrating narrative of autism is my superpower and things like that. That's another narrative that does not help us. The deficit narrative is one extreme, the superhero powers is another extreme, and neither of those is representative or realistic, and they're actually really quite damaging. Oh no, Chloe, you've lost a tangent. And so what I say is that, you know, we're allowed to be bog standard and average and boring, because there are plenty of non-autistic people who are not all singing or dancing and shiny. And I also say we're allowed to be arseholes, right? Because it's a quality. We are autistic people. We're not just these children or, you know, infants and infantilized and so on. We're also not these shiny rain people, rain man, rain woman, whatever. Yes, there can be, some of us can be really problematic and terrible as well, because we're humans. Exactly. And I think that's the thing as well, remembering we're autistic human beings, I think is really important. And I think that is really important. I don't think I would represent or depict my experience of the world as an autistic person at this point in time as necessarily I am or have experienced true oppression. I would say I've experienced stigma for being an autistic person, but it would be wholly inappropriate, I think, for me personally to say I've experienced oppression. And like I say, we should be, and I'm aware that I'm talking, shutting up and just listening as well. Because I have no idea what it's like to be a Black autistic woman in any capacity. I like to be able to find commonality in terms of how we experience being autistic. But even then, I think, which will be another conversation which I would love to have with yourself and anybody else who would come and educate me, is, again, the differences of how we talked about how might your stims be different because you're autistic and you're Black, how would they be different to mine, and so on and so forth. And I've gone off on a completely different tangent again. Oh no.
You haven't.
Functioning differences.
Yeah, but no, what you're saying, I can see the logical line of what you're saying and why it links from one thing to another. So to me, you're not going off on tangents, but maybe it's your need to be organised that makes you feel like you're going off on tangents.
Yes, it is.
But it doesn't feel like that for me.
Okay, as long as you're following, that's great. I have to hope that my students, when I'm lecturing or training or anything like that, are paying attention, because I'll go off on weird random tangents. I remember talking about dolphins once and I had no idea why, and I was talking about mental health and stigma, and I had to sort of went off on tangent and looked at them all and I said, anyone know what I was talking about? And luckily they'd been listening, so I could pick up the thread again. I think this has come down to then my final sort of important question, which is which would be a much bigger discussion we can have another time, but how do white autistic people effectively pass the mic? That's what I wanted. And I don't think you can necessarily answer this per se in a really detailed way now, but it's something I desperately want to do. And I say it multiple times, in a non-tokenistic way. How do I do that effectively and authentically?
I always say, anything you're invited to, ask how many Black and brown autistic individuals have also been asked to speak. How representative is that? Because there's so many times where people have put up so wonderful positive things about workshops they've been to or big conferences, and they're like, oh my God, it was so fantastic to be around so many autistic people. And then I'll be like, well, how many Black speakers were there? And they're like, well, there was none. I was like, well, you weren't really around a true representation of the community then, you know? And so you in a position of privilege should be asking how many black and brown people are getting up to speak.
Yeah.
And more often than not, the answer is 0. And then why is it 0? And whenever I ask that, I then often get a private message saying, oh, could you come and such and such? And I don't ask the question because I want to speak. I want to learn as well. But it astounds me that in 2021, there's nobody still regularly asking that question. That should be something you're always asking about, just like how you ask about reasonable adjustments. If you see it as a reasonable adjustment, actually we need it as a reasonable adjustment. We also need a black or brown person getting up there to talk. And if you're going to say, well, we don't know NA, well, why don't you know NA? Oh, well, none of them have contacted us. And we're like, well, actually, have you had to contact the other speakers, or did they contact you? And actually, they reach out to speakers, but then expect us as black speakers to reach out to the conference. And so we're already then being disadvantaged, because should I have to do that to speak? And I think as well, it's about education. Be reading about stuff. Be reading about anti-racist practices. You're in education, so how do you make your classroom anti-racist? Be educating yourself on that. And I think from start big and work your way up. It's not something that I expect people to completely understand within a week or two. It's something that could take years. I think it's more to do with your willingness and putting one foot in front of the other and starting the work, instead of, I find a lot of white people just say, oh, well, we want to know more, but we don't know where to go. And during the George Floyd thing, a lot of us as black people, not just in autism, but in general, we were getting a lot of white people private messaging us, asking, what book should I read? Oh, I feel awful about what's happened. And it was just like re-traumatizing us. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And that's something that is something I'm consciously aware of as well.
Yeah.
Of wanting, and this is my problem, this is nobody else's problem, and it's not your problem, it is my problem, is that fear that I'm going to be asking something of somebody that I shouldn't be asking. And I need to get over that too. I need to work out what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. That's not down to anyone else to tell me, kind of thing either. Because I shouldn't be expecting, and I would never want to expect, labour or education or anything from somebody who is a black person and they're oppressed and so on and so forth. So I do try to be proactive and reaching out to yourself, reaching out to anyone who I feel like they've got a really good topic to discuss with us on Aucademy, and things like that, and trying to again, do it in an appropriate, or what I would hope is an appropriate way, where I'm not asking to be educated on something that I shouldn't be asking. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I mean, for me, I don't trust our government enough to tell me that what was happening in the Labour Party was anti-Semitism, because I don't trust the government. So I needed to then understand what anti-Semitism actually was. And there were lots of people talking about certain tropes and things that I didn't understand and wasn't aware of. But I'm aware of the tropes about black people, but I won't necessarily be aware of the tropes that they have for Jewish people. So I needed to understand anti-Semitism better. And I didn't have in my group of friends in Sheffield, none of them were Jewish who I could sit down and talk to. But I did have a few people who were married to Jewish people as Facebook friends. So actually, I understand that I want to know this answer. I want to know what I can do better, how I can support stuff, how I need to educate myself, but I don't know who to talk to. And it's about not being reactive. So when the George Floyd thing happened, it was instantaneous. Like, we were all being bombarded with people saying, oh my God, we feel awful. What should we read? And we're like, we've just seen a man be killed. We can't think right now. So it's not about being reactive, but it's about saying, listen, I'm absolutely clueless about this. And I don't want to be an arse. So I want to know and do better. Do you have any suggestions? No pressure to answer it straight away. But I would appreciate a response.
I mean, if I'm honest, I also get frustrated when people do expect that of individuals, because I just think we live in the age of the internet. You can Google, I will look into, and people who have been prepared to educate without being demanded of them or expected of them, or me bringing in my white guilt for the situation to that person, because you don't need that. You don't deserve that. So that frustrates me when I think you can go and look that stuff up. But
I will say this, we had a paper come out earlier in the year saying there was no more systemic racism in the UK. And that paper, the majority of people who wrote that paper were Black. These were conservative individuals who were representing the Conservative government. So if a white individual went to them to ask for help about anti-racism and information, actually they'd be told there isn't really a problem. We're just not integrated into society enough. So you have to make sure you're talking to the right person. That's where the problem really is. I saw that with the anti-Semitism thing, because if you spoke to one group of Jewish people, they were saying, no, this is a slur. This is just something to derail Labour. And then you had some people saying, yeah, absolutely, this is anti-Semitism. And so I think sometimes just Googling something can be difficult. So I think it's important.
Yeah, I guess my issue is hoping that those individuals would have the critical thinking ability that I might put into something. So for instance, I wouldn't just take one person's word for anything. I would try and look at multiple sources. And
unfortunately,
I'm expecting too much of people, I think.
I think you are, I think you are, because lots of people, that paper came out and lots of people were like, there you go, this is a group of Black people and they've said there's no racism problem. So then when it devalued what we were saying when we're talking about systemic racism and microaggressions, that paper single-handedly it devalued everything we were trying to do. And as Black people, again, we were just absolutely exhausted, because we're like, we can't believe people who look like us has put their name to this document. So I do accept that it is hard to talk to the right person, and it is about critical thinking. It is about ensuring that you're not just around people who think like you, because I'm like really liberal. I'm pro everything as long as you're not hurting people, and that's how I'm raising my kids. But if you're just around people who are arseholes, who are racist, who are homophobic, then actually your opinions of stuff and what you're learning from other people, it's going to be, in my mind, wrong. And so you have to be able to stand back from a situation and get the information and then figure out what sits right with you. And I think for white autistic people who are trying to figure out or trying to get more information and figure out how to support Black autistics and get Black speakers, a lot of it is about being on Twitter and hashtags like autistic while Black and Black autistics and things like that, and listening to Black autistic people, because actually I've not seen a Black autistic person who conversers on Twitter, I've not seen them have a different narrative from mine and say that there isn't an issue. That doesn't mean there won't be people who think differently to me. But what I am saying is I can have empathy for individuals like yourself who don't really know where to turn or who to talk to, but equally, you don't want to be bombarding people with questions, and you understand as well that you need to kind of figure stuff out for yourself. I'd always prefer for people to be getting the right information from trusted people.
And I mean,
that can be hard.
I mean, I definitely don't anyway. I don't do the whole thing of asking certain questions, particularly if they're quite a sensitive topic, like say around the time of like George Floyd and things. That just wasn't appropriate to me. I didn't think that it didn't even cross my mind that I would do that to a black person at that point in time. So I guess what I'm talking about is more, I'm going to continue to try and be very proactive, and I do follow all sorts of different people on Twitter. Twitter is actually a really good place to find autistic people. I do find a lot of our guests on social media because I follow them and I'm like, oh, this is a fantastic thing. I'd love to learn more about this. Yeah. So I think I'm going to try and be more proactive and keep just asking the way I would ask a white autistic person. I'm interested in this topic. Would you like to come on and cover it? That's it. That's all I'm really asking of anyone. Yeah. And I'm just going to keep doing it. I think my concern that I'd had was that I wasn't getting replies from people, and whether I was being inappropriate in asking, or I don't know. But again, that's my issue. That's nobody else's issue. And I need to just push through it, get over it. And, because I'm not going to stop asking, I think. I think me not asking anymore, that would be a problem. Worrying, am I annoying this person by asking them to come on? Am I this, that, and the other? And it's like that doesn't matter. If it's someone like me with like executive dysfunction, I've probably not even read the first 2 or 3 messages because I've got. I'm just always conscious.
That's really another thing that ties back to if you've not heard from somebody, they might not even be like ghosting you. It really might just be like, gosh, they've not gotten around to reading it. So yeah, continue asking people.
Try again.
Yeah.
Okay, because there's definitely some black autistic people of colour that I've asked and I've not had any replies from, and I'm like, but I really want to hear the topic that you talk about. There's a book called All the Weight of Your Dreams. Have you read that? If I'm honest, I don't read much at the moment other than like fiction, because that kind of helps my brain. That's okay. Yeah, it's just like an anthology of in America, I'd be classed as a person of colour. So it's an anthology of women of colour or people who identify as women of colour, and they've put a book together in America. And the chapters are really, really short. Some of it just like a couple of pages from individual people. And it really is fascinating because everybody communicates their section very differently. And I don't know how many of them are on Twitter. I think a few of them are. Again, sorry? All the weight of our dreams, or all the weight of your dreams. Okay, no. Yeah. So that was a nice. I read that for my first assignment in my master's because there were no books in England or any journals, so I had to go and get information from America. Yeah. Because I'm conscious of the time. I knew this to happen anyway. I so easy to get stuck into conversations with people. And this is why Louis usually shouts at me and he's just like, dinner's been ready for like an hour. And I'm like, oh no, okay. But I don't have executive function issues. Of course you don't. So is there any final things you wanted to talk about or just mention about executive function issues? Or do you feel like we've covered what you were hoping? Yeah, I guess I just wanted to explain to everybody why I didn't
show up, because that's like, again, I'm fueled by fear. And I've actually really liked this session because it hasn't been planned. I've not come with a presentation. I've not tried to appear to be professional. I've just come and said, this is the crack.
Not have that pressure put on you.
Yeah. I've not felt pressured to perform. So that's refreshing for me. I mean, I'll still be absolutely exhausted later and thinking, oh my God, should I have said that? And why did I say it like that? I should have done it this way. So that will all still happen. But actually, it's been nice just to have a somewhat honest, because I'm still masking, I must be, to have a somewhat honest conversation about my difficulties and just the history of my difficulties, really. So thank you for giving me the space to do that. I appreciated it.
Oh, it's so useful, and just this idea of the interplay between those different things, the executive functioning, the masking, the bin analogy, which is like, I like say, because I think in pictures mine's more of a filing cabinet, although I do think of it like a tree when I'm problem solving. Like this could happen, and this could happen, and this could happen, and that's exhausting in itself. So I think actually all of this is quite useful for people, and maybe slightly cathartic for you because you were frustrated with yourself.
Yeah, and you were like, oh, I didn't even worry about it, and I didn't sleep for days thinking, oh my God, Melissa, you're crap.
Maybe I should be clearer to any of our guests that, you know, it's all fine. That's yeah.
Well, no, because I wouldn't have read that. So even if you'd put it in an email to say, if you can't show up, don't worry, I wouldn't have read it, because I just see the heading. I think, oh, right, I've got that on such and such a day. And I just put it in my diary and put a colour on it. So I know, oh, right, that's a talk. You know, that's a talk I've got to give. And then I assign a colour and put it in my diary. So I wouldn't have read, you know, don't worry. I only found the link for it like 2 minutes before I came on the email, so it wouldn't have made a difference. Have you seen the Da Vinci Code?
Yes.
I'm Silas. You know, when he's whipping him, I am the Silas of this story. So it wouldn't have made a difference. It's just how I am. But thankfully, I'm working towards being less of that.
Yeah, and I hope so. Like I say, it's the empathy thing. It's just the blame and the, you know, that you direct at yourself is quite painful, because I'm like, oh no, you don't need to. But I know that's also not helpful. It's like me trying to say to Annette, stop worrying about things, or, you know, that's not helpful. If we could do that, we would have done that years ago. But just to know that it's not an issue from my perspective.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And our favourite final question that we ask all our lovely guests, which is, what is your favourite stim?
I love singing, but my daughter is at the age where she's brutally honest, and she says I just ruin every song because I add my own bits to it, and I always try and sing like I'm like a Mariah Carey or Patti LaBelle or like Whitney Houston. So she's like, Mom, you're just ruining another song. So I think stimming for me, especially as a Black woman, is it's an acceptable stim that you can do, where you're not going to draw attention to yourself if you're humming. So yeah, I love to stim by singing. And at the minute, the song I'm singing the most at the minute is the Golden Girls theme, because it's on Disney Plus, and my daughter's really gotten into watching the Golden Girls. So all my meetings up, because it's the summer holidays, and she like refuses to leave the living room, so she'll have her headphones on watching Golden Girls, and I'll have to say in all my Zoom meetings, apologies if you can hear my daughter laughing, she's watching Golden Girls, which they all think is really cool because it's such an old show. So yeah, at the minute I'm singing Golden Girls theme tune quite a lot.
That's so random.
I know.
This is, I say this every week, this is why I like this question as well, because it's a nice way to wrap things up, but it's nice to see different people's favourite stims. Because for a while, a few people have had very auditory or like sound-based favourite stims, which interests me, because a lot of us might talk more about, you know, the physical movement type stims that we might like or enjoy. So yeah, I do. It's nice to hear. So some people have talked about that their particular stim is listening to a certain piece of music or something. So now you're talking more about the vocalization and things. And yeah, that's why I like this question. I meow songs. So I really, your daughter is like better off than having me terribly meowing songs.
I'm going to let her know that, and then I'm going to tell her to be more humble and appreciative of her
appreciative, because you could be doing something far more frustrating and annoying. Or
absolutely,
like my poor partner, we've been together 6 years, and I sing the same made up nonsense songs to him for like 6 years, all day, every day. So, you know.
And it's not even a known song. You've made it up.
It's just nonsense. Yeah, just made up nonsense songs. Some of them really.
My daughter is so lucky. I'm going to just rub it in.
And I can never remember what they are. So I mention this quite often, but until he's there and I'm in that frame of mind, I can't remember them. But they're the same songs I've been singing to him for years. And there's lots of little nonsense ones, and then he'll be like, oh, that one's back, is it? Because I'm just singing this random song at him. But yeah, you know, it's lovely. I love it. Oh, thank you so much, Melissa. This is really, really interesting. And there's so many other topics that I would love to discuss with you at some point in the future. Thank you, lovely, lovely Aucademy people, for being here as well. And if you stuck it out for the whole 2 hours and something, I never make them an hour. I don't know why anyone. Well, you must all know now, by now, that I list them that they're going to be an hour's long, but they're never an hour, because executive functioning, and I get stuck into the conversations. So thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you, lovely, lovely people. Have our fantastic outro music, and I will see you soon. Bye.